Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the call this morning. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the final proposal and draft tariff language for the load, export, and wheeling priorities topic as part of the market enhancements for summer 2021 Readiness Initiative. This is Christina Osborne from ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating the meeting. So James Friedrich, who is the policy lead for this initiative, will review the final proposal, and then Jordan Penuv and Anthony Vonkovich from ISO Legal will review the proposed changes to the tariff language. But first, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mark Rockwater, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, and he would like to say a few words to open up the meeting. There are several other ISO subject matter experts who have been heavily involved in this initiative. They are shown in the panelist window to the right of your screen. I'm not going to go through all the names, but you can see who's logged in from the ISO, and they are here to respond to questions.
Thank
so this
you.
graphic,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, this graphic, no, you're okay. This graphic depicts the ISO stakeholder process, and as I mentioned earlier, we are in the final proposal phase of the process. I'll go over a more detailed schedule at the end of the presentation. We are going to stop for questions throughout the meeting, so at that time we'll provide instructions with how to raise your hand. We do ask that you start by stating your name and affiliation. We are recording the meeting and we'll make the video file available on the initial webpage for a limited time. As a reminder, please request permission from the ISO before reprinting or sharing any related transcriptions. So Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to take a little bit of a moment to set the stage. This topic, this issue, we're taking more time before we finalize it and bring this to the board for decision. And I think it's an acknowledgement that this issue and these types of issues where sufficient supply and sufficient transmission availability to meet the aggregate demand across the system are some of the most challenging and contentious issues that we have to deal with. And you overlay the fact that we do not have much time to continue to be ready for this summer, and you can understand that this is a very challenging issue to address and deal with. Yet, we have to deal with it, and we have to address it, and we have to come up with what is a workable solution for this coming summer. I think we're all motivated to avoid these conditions by ensuring that there's sufficient capacity exists and there's sufficient capacity available on a daily basis. But nonetheless, we have to be ready for these conditions, and when these conditions exist, we have to have something that is fair, equitable, and operationally implementable. Under these conditions, very tight conditions, we also recognize that market solutions and results produced may not be a sufficient arbiter of these challenging operational issues when they occur. As a result, we've heard stakeholder comments to previous proposals, and we've attempted to respond and provide a proposal that does the following: that is fair and equitable, recognizes the importance of trying to minimize the potential or the loss of load shedding for any balancing area. It recognizes the role of resource adequacy to meet native load, but it also recognizes that contract arrangements in other balancing areas by other load-serving entities have also been arranged, and they are relying on those capacity arrangements in a similar way to meet their demand in their area. We're also trying to follow principles established by FERC in terms of open access and fairness to the system, to fairness of access to the system. But FERC also has weighed in terms of when these conditions occur. They've provided guidance previously about how to deal with these types of issues, load internal versus external demand. The solution has to be implementable in a time frame for this summer. And finally, the solution has to maintain a collaborative, mutual assistive environment so that at the end of the day, operationally, we can minimize impact and do the right thing, what is best for the overall system. With that in mind, I think today we are presenting a proposal that has attempted to do that for this summer. And the solution that we have come up with this summer, I think, is we recognize will be something that is only for this summer, and we will need to continue to work and strive to meet these objectives in a longer-term time frame, and we're motivated and committed to doing that. I look forward to hearing people's comments. I think we're trying to use this opportunity to clarify the proposal. I recognize that people have possibly disparate and strong views about this topic. We will hear those, and we will look forward to your written comments about this. Understand this is a very challenging issue, and please help us come to a solution that is workable and fair and equitable for this summer. And then with that, I will turn it over to the team working on this.
All right. James, you on?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
So this is James Friedrich. I'm going to give an overview of the changes that we made to the proposal in the load, export, and wheeling sections of the paper. So just a quick summary of what we'll be talking about. There's three major categories of changes that we made to this proposal. The first is to differentiate now between high priority and low priority wheels. So we'll be going through that in detail. Our proposal has created a new process after HASP to equitably allocate import and internal transmission to high priority wheels in need of load rather than relying solely on the penalty prices for those. And then finally, the last change to the proposal is to now allow variable energy resources to be designated to support a PT export under certain conditions. So I would like to add a few other items. In our final proposal, we highlighted in red text some areas that needed to be clarified or updated from the draft final proposal. So hopefully you found that helpful so you didn't have to dig through and compare side by side the documents to try to find the little things that had changed. So we did document a few small clarifications to the other topics in this initiative that were approved at Wednesday's Board of Governors meeting. For example, we clarified that we removed the EIM transfers out of the cost allocation for the import make-whole payment during tight system conditions. We had a few clarifications that we made in the scarcity price enhancements related to arming load, and more clarifications about what that is and how that affects market prices. We also clarified that in our draft final proposal and also in the draft final proposal presentation, we said that the interconnection enhancements piece did not require any tariff changes, and that was a mistake, and so we corrected that in the paper and apologize for that. Next slide, please. So let's go ahead and get started with the material, and let's leave it at this slide because before we go into the changes that we made, I think it'd be helpful to start by re-describing what was in our draft final proposal to provide some additional context so stakeholders can see more clearly how the proposal has changed. So as we described in the draft final proposal and on stakeholder calls, today, meaning before any of these market changes, wheels have a, quote, super priority over CAISO load because of the linkage between the penalty prices associated with the import and export legs of the wheel. The market software has a constraint to ensure that the import and export leg of the wheel is balanced. That means that the import and export quantities are equal. That has the effect of making the penalty prices for the two legs of the wheel transaction additive and thus creating the super priority. So in our draft final proposal, we propose to set the self-scheduled import leg of a wheel bid to $0 and set the self-scheduled export leg of the wheel bid at PT priority, the same penalty price as meeting our load. Now, in the appendices to our draft final proposal, we put out some examples that showed, based on the penalty prices, how wheels would compete for intertie capacity with imports needed to serve CAISO load. So if the import was self-scheduled or bidding less than $0, then priority was given to the import to serve CAISO load. And if the import bid was greater than $0, priority was given to the wheel. And we've been thinking through the implications of this and reflecting on stakeholder feedback and realized that we don't think we can get to an equitable solution only using the penalty parameters to divvy up that import capability between the imports and the wheels. So in the event that HASP is unable to meet load and our intertie limit is binding, then we'll need to do something different from the HASP result. And I'm saying HASP purposely as opposed to IFM and RUC because HASP is really where, you know, the rubber meets the road in terms of import-export scheduling for real time. So we've come up with a post-HASP process in which we would allocate that import capability amongst the import and wheels that we'll discuss in these slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so in our final proposal, we have broken up the wheels into two levels of priority now. There is a PT wheel, or a high priority wheel, and an LPT wheel, or a low priority wheel. The PT wheel comes with various conditions. A PT wheel is one that notifies the CAISO in advance, or specifically 45 days prior to the month, which is consistent with the RA monthly showing timeline. Their megawatt quantity of their wheel and can show it has firm transmission externally to reach the CAISO BAA boundary and has a contract to serve load in another BAA before the FERC filing date of these changes. The scheduling coordinator of the wheel will then register an export system resource in the CAISO master file that will be used to identify that this export can receive high priority wheel treatment. So if these conditions are met, the CAISO proposes to maintain an import leg penalty price of the wheel to be the same as a self-scheduled import. And the export leg will continue to receive a penalty price equivalent to PT exports. So now we have high priority wheels with scheduling priority equivalent to self-scheduled imports needed to serve CAISO load. But as I'll walk through in some upcoming examples, you will see why we don't necessarily want to rely on the market results that rely only on these penalty prices, because not all RA capacity is self-scheduled. Now on the bottom there, the LPT wheels are similar in priority to what we proposed they would have in our draft final proposal, where the import leg is set equal to $0, but now, with the exception now that the export leg of the wheel would be set equal to the LPT export penalty price. We also would not allow scheduling coordinators who are scheduling wheels to use economic bids less than $0 for the import leg to try to circumvent the priority. Next slide, please.
James, let's go ahead and pause for questions. I know we do have one person. Again, press pound 2 to raise your hand if you do have a question. So we'll take the first question.
And your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, this is Michelle Keto from the CPUC. I just have a question. So I see that you have PT wheels here and LPT wheels. So if there is an RA import that is self-scheduling, but there's congestion at the North Path, do the LPT wheels beat the RA imports that are self-scheduling?
By North Path, do you mean North? Go ahead, Don.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead, James.
I was just going to clarify. By North Path, are you referring to a northern intertie or internal path?
Yeah, no. So a northern intertie. So let's say at the northern intertie, there's an RA resource that's self-scheduling, and then there's an LPT wheel. which wins? And let's say that, we're not in dire circumstances, just to sort of on an everyday basis.
Go ahead, Don. I'll let you finish the thought.
So, Michelle, on an everyday basis, you're saying the import is self-scheduling. In that instance, then you would see that meeting CAISO load would be more costly to curtail than to curtail the low priority wheel.
Right, but it's not to meet load. So let's say that, load could be met with internal resources, and so you're trying to resolve the congestion. So LPT wheel, don't you pair the zero with the export tie so that if we're not going to cut load, then the LPT wins, right, even over an RA resource that's self-scheduled?
Well, I think in that instance, Michelle, I wouldn't even say whether there's a winner or a loser in that instance. In the event that the CAISO is able to serve load and able to serve the low priority wheel, that's the correct economic solution, and we use the lowest cost resources to meet the total demand, including the CAISO load and the export leg of the wheel.
Right, but let's say that the RA, because the CPUC requires the RA imports to flow, right? And so let's say they execute an import contract, an RA import contract for, let's say, $40 a megawatt hour, and to get it in to meet the CPUC's must-flow requirements, they self-schedule it, but it's not a day that they technically need it to meet load. It wouldn't flow, right, if there were LPT wheels there. Is that right?
No, but Michelle, again, a self-scheduled import should clear before the LPT wheel should clear, but there's some interactions that can be in there because the LPT wheel, I'd have to go look at the numbers again, but the LPT wheel penalty price relative to the load power balance constraint, the LPT wheel export leg is a little bit higher on that. But in most instances, again, to the extent that we can support both internal demand and the wheels, that through the offers that we have, whether self-scheduled or economically bid, then that we're able to reach a market solution and fully support both the low priority wheel and internal demand.
Okay, but it might be that the RA resource is contracted for and so will be paid for, but won't that also mean that you'll have to dispatch more internal resources to meet load if that RA resource doesn't make it through because of an LPT wheel?
Or you might dispatch imports at a different intertie. There's all kinds of different things that we could do, whether it's internal or external supply. Again, in these situations where we're not in sufficient supply, then the market is able to reach a solution using all the resources available to it.
Okay. So, I mean, even though RA is meant to meet 1 and 2. So I guess what I'm saying is if we're not in those severe conditions, you pair the import with the export leg because you pair them together. So at 0 plus a negative 1150. But if you're meeting load, we have a negative 400 on the import bid, and so it's negative 400 versus negative 1150. Doesn't that mean the LPT flows in those circumstances? And I think I'm hearing you say yes, the LPT flows. Is that right?
Right, because we're able to meet the total demand on the system. We're able to meet internal load using RA and non-RA resources that have offered into the market, and we're able to also clear the low priority wheel because there is sufficient transmission and generation able to the extent that there is congestion, to provide counterflows on that and for the market to reach an economic solution. Okay.
I mean, I just want to point out that part of the reason that we're doing this is because, parties have said that they have contractual arrangements for these wheels, and we're trying to honor these contractual arrangements. But I would also note that we have contractual arrangements for the RA resources, and we're not honoring those if we allow the LPTs to flow before those arrangements, right?
No, this will not happen. This is George Angelovich. So the LPT wheel gets the scheduling priority of the lower price taker export because, as you said, and we said earlier here, the import self-schedule that is paired with the LPT wheel has a zero penalty. And therefore, the overall scheduling priority of the LPT wheel that competes for import capacity on a constrained intertie in the import direction is lower than import self-schedules on that intertie. So the import self-schedule will be having scheduling priority that is higher than the LPT wheel that goes through in the same direction. So
okay, I feel like I'm getting a little confused answer. So sorry, it's just really important for me to understand this. So you're saying that the LPT, the RA import is negative 400, and the LPT wheel has a zero bid, but don't you pair it with the export leg at 1150? So doesn't it win?
Why do you say the import self-schedule is minus 400?
Because the import self-schedule, the penalty price, right, for a constrained tie?
Are you in real time in HASP? Or
no, I'm in IFM. So if you look at page 8, it says the penalty price for a self-scheduled import and the import leg of a PT wheel is negative 400. So I'm saying we have an RA import self-scheduled, which is negative 400. We have an LPT wheel that has to bid at zero, but you pair it with the penalty price of the LPT export, and the export leg of the LPT wheel is 1150, right? So 0 plus 1150 is 1150. Versus the RA import only gets 400, right?
Let us work out this example, and we'll post a result. We'll have to go through IFM first and then in RAC, right? Because those schedules compete first in IFM, and then they go in RAC. So we'll see what wins at the end. Let's do that exercise afterwards, and we'll publish the outcome of this competition. Okay.
Okay, well, at the end of this one, because I have other questions, but I'll leave it for right now. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, we do have two more here. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good morning. It's David Francis with DTE Energy Trading. Just want to make sure I understand. On page 7, are you proposing that there's essentially a tying arrangement for third-party users of ISO transmission, so now they have to have external transmission procured at least 45 days prior to be able to bid for ISO transmission?
Dave, this is Don. The requirement is that 45 days prior to the month, you need to have procured external firm transmission to receive the PT wheel status.
So you are tying it. You are requiring a tying arrangement. You're saying I can't have ISO transmission at this price level. I'm not allowed to bid for it unless I have a third-party transmission arrangement that's unrelated to ISO.
Well, remember, what we're talking about here with regards to the high priority and the low priority wheels are actually self-schedules. And so what we're saying is to the extent that you have procured external firm transmission to our boundary, that is, and demonstrate that 45 days prior to the month, then you're able, when you self-schedule your wheel to get the high priorities, to the extent that you haven't done that, you can still self-schedule a wheel, but it will come in at a lower priority.
Exactly. So I have to make a third-party arrangement that you're now tying to be able to use ISO transmission on a daily basis at a high priority relative to load.
Correct.
Okay, I don't think that's fair and equitable. Will EIM entities be required to register export system resources?
To the extent that they're looking to participate at our intertie scheduling point, that would be in the ISO's market in the IFM, RUC, and HAP, that yes, they would need to, in order to receive the high priority, they would need to meet the obligations outlined on the slide.
So you're telling me that a entity that wants to purchase ISO transmission is unable to price it, is unable to bid it equal to native load for transmission use?
Can you ask that question again? I didn't follow it.
Sure. Can I, as a CAISO transmission purchaser, am I able to buy CAISO transmission at the same price and on the same timing as load?
Within the CAISO system, yeah, we're not proposing any changes to.
Well, except you are. You're saying here. You're saying for me to have a high priority wheel, that I have to have some external transmission arrangement made 45 days prior.
That's correct.
And you're settling load on. You're settling load. You're providing load transmission on a day ahead, on an hourly basis, correct?
For CAISO transmission, that is correct. So for CAISO
transmission,
you're not making.
But I'm a non-load guy, so I don't have the same. I don't have the same opportunity. I think we're at an impasse.
This is Brad Cooper. Let me clarify. We're giving the high priority wheels the same priority as RA imports, and RA imports require an advance 45-day showing, just like the requirement for the high priority wheels.
That's the terms of the RA process. You're adding this now for transmission and not on an equitable basis, in my opinion. So I'll let this one go. The next question I have is, are all the penalty prices that will be going to be used for this summer currently published? And if not, when will they be?
They are published in our business practice manuals.
All of them?
All of the ones that we'll be going through in the next few slides are.
Are those all of them? So 6-8 months ago when we started talking about this, and CAISO agreed that it would publish penalty prices that had been previously unpublished. Those are now published?
Someone could correct me, but I don't believe we've made any changes to the DPMs at this time.
Okay, that's counter to the agreement that I thought was discussed about the CAISO.
Okay.
So I'll review that with the slide.
Hold on. The published values are what are currently in place. Okay, the current parameters that are currently existing are published. If and when this proposal gets implemented, we will update those with these parameters. Okay?
Correct me if I'm wrong. There was a point where CAISO was using unpublished penalty prices, and that was a pretty heated discussion. CAISO agreed they would publish those. I just want to make sure that everything CAISO is using to sell the market is public and public.
We will publish all parameters.
Yeah, this is Anna McKenna. It's not part of this, discussion, but what you're referring to is something that's currently underway separately in another effort. It's not related to this discussion at all, but we'll continue to do with that effort.
It is related, and if it settles the market, and you're talking about penalty prices here and how the market will be used and how certain entities will get priority for transmission usage, then it's equally applicable here. That's all I got for now. Thanks, guys.
Victor, do we have anybody else? Thank you.
We do have one other question here. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Laura Trelease with the Bonneville Power Administration, and I had similar observations to the previous caller and had some questions about the fair and equitable portion of the requirements to be a PT wheel. And the first one did seem that requiring firm transmission externally to reach the boundary of the CAISO BA, while import RA resources don't require firm transmission in order to get that same priority, that doesn't appear to be fair and equitable. And the second is that the way I read this in this first sub-bullet, it says that the contract has to be signed by the FERC filing date, which if this ends up staying on the same timeline that the CAISO has proposed, I think that's April 23rd. So the way I read this is if an external party wants to serve their load in the month of August, they have to have a signed contract by April 23rd and notify the CAISO of that contract 45 days in advance, where it appears that CAISO load, they can still purchase RA resources up to mid-June to serve their August load. Is my understanding of that correct?
You're correct that the showings for RA occur 45 days prior to the month, which is the same time period we're requesting that the PT wheels highlight that they've procured their their external transmission. And then on the reason why we're asking for the signed contracts is, again, we are trying to limit the amount of given that we don't have a process, we're developing one from a longer term standpoint where we would then look at how we would distribute import capability and transmission of the CAISO system on a forward basis. We think we're giving sufficient lead time to parties that to the extent that they were planning to use the CAISO system to meet their load and request PT wheel status, that they should be engaging in that forward contracting prior, no longer after we have completed our filing at FERC.
Okay, I appreciate that. I understand the need for a long-term framework, and we're very supportive of that. But I think the way it lands is that we are choosing to not be fair and equitable until we have a long-term framework in place. And so I think these requirements of getting PT wheel doesn't match up with fair and equitable requirements to have equal priority to RA imports. And so that's our read of it. I appreciate the confirmation.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is, to the extent that a party has procured energy and procured firm transmission to our boundary, that's basically a showing that they were planning on using the CAISO system to serve their load in a different balancing authority area. If you look at the California LSEs, they're always planning to use the CAISO transmission system to serve their load. So I think it does put everyone on an equal footing in that sense, that to the extent that you're going to use the CAISO system, we would want to be notified of that 45 days prior to the month.
Right. I mean, I think the open access principles are a first come, first serve. And so even in external BAs, when you have a party designating a resource, they don't automatically get firm transmission for that. They have to be conscious about the timing of designating new resources, and they can only receive firm transmission if it's available at the time they designate it. So if it's a month in advance, that doesn't mean they automatically get firm transmission. So it is very different than the traditional OAT framework and how other transmission service providers do open access on their system. Understanding that CAISO doesn't have a framework today, I completely appreciate and understand that.
All right, we do have another question here.
Thank you.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. It's Mark Holman with PowerX. I just wanted to follow up on BPA's comments. First, just want to say really appreciate Mark Rothleader's opening comments, and I agree with a lot of that sentiment, that this is a very difficult issue. We don't have a forward open access framework for CAISO transmission. We have summer approaching us and need to find solutions for the summer 2021 season. However, I do respectfully agree with BPA's comments. We do not see this proposal as fair and equitable. We don't think this is meeting that requirement. And maybe I'll describe it a few different ways, and I think Laura touched on a lot of our comments. One is that when we get into those situations that we all hope to avoid, where there are challenges meeting load in the CAISO BAA, there are also challenges potentially meeting load in, let's say, BAs in the Southwest, and both the Southwest entities and CAISO LSEs want to secure Northwest supply coming in on import interties. So you have wheel-through service to keep the lights on in the Southwest, competing with the CAISO load, seeking to acquire that import supply to maintain reliability. And obviously those are very challenging circumstances, very narrow, but also very important. The proposal as it stands today creates an incredibly narrow category for wheels to get PT status. It's requiring that entities in the Southwest that transact and want to acquire supply from the Northwest have to transact prior to the CAISO's FERC filing. They have to be on monthly firm transmission. They need to notify the CAISO 45 days prior, and they need to receive a day-ahead or an IFM market award. In contrast, receiving that higher priority status to ultimately be in a situation to be in that pro rata curtailment with those wheel-throughs, the category for imports serving CAISO load is incredibly broad. It allows import RA contracts that are assigned before or after the CAISO files at FERC. It allows those import RA contracts to be on any quality of transmission to get to the CAISO boundary. And then it goes further, and those import RA contracts may not be economic in the IFM and don't receive an award, but could later be included as a result of the RUC process. And it allows non-RA day-ahead purchases that serve load in the CAISO BA to be in that category. So we have an incredibly narrow category of PT wheel status and an incredibly broad category of imports that qualify to meet that pro rata curtailment. So for that reason, we do not see it as fair and equitable. When we get outside of that category, we also see circumstances where imports will step ahead of other wheels. And so we really see this proposal as giving the CAISO BAA priority access to Northwest supply ahead of Southwest BAAs, not because they contracted it first, not because they competed to acquire firm rights to the boundary, not because they're more economic in submitting bids into the CAISO markets, but simply because they're located in the CAISO BAA. So we do recognize the tremendous efforts the CAISO has put into this, the very difficult circumstances. The final thing I'll say is that those penalty prices also will ultimately determine in those circumstances who flows on the external transmission systems, trumping the open access framework that exists on external transmission systems. And that is particularly applicable here, where the key paths are the Pacific AC and the Pacific DC. There are transmission rights that are invested in on the north side. There is transmission service in the CAISO BAA, and in these circumstances, this proposal can be expected to determine who flows, and so that is also concerning. Again, appreciate the difficult circumstances, but we do agree with BPA that this proposal is not fair and equitable.
Thanks for your perspective.
I want to test that. So, is it not fair and equitable because the cutoff point of the, in your mind, because the cutoff of the point of the filing, because it was our objective to ensure that those wheel-throughs that contracted prior to understanding what the changes of the rules of the road were going to be would be honored. That was our objective. Okay, and I understand that those were not contracted under the expectation that a change in environment was going to occur with regards to the priorities. So that was kind of the objective here. Are you saying that your fair and equitable concern is focused around the concern about the timing of the cutoff?
Could you please press pound 2 one more time? Thank you. And you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I understand the exception and do appreciate the CAISO's effort to make that exception for these transactions that have been executed prior to the FERC filing date that are on monthly firm transmission, and so we do appreciate that exception. I think the way to describe it, Mark, is the way we think of this proposal is it gives, in these narrow circumstances, and I really want to stress that because I understand that in other circumstances this will not apply, but in the narrow circumstances where we have reliability challenges in the CAISO BAA, we have reliability challenges in the Southwest BAAs, imports serving CAISO load will get priority over wheels in a very broad array of circumstances, including when those import RA contracts are on non-firm, the wheels may be on firm, including when those imports may not even be an RA contract, might just be a day-ahead purchase. So we're seeing this as broadly elevating, in those circumstances, imports to serve CAISO load over wheel-throughs with a very narrow exception for contracts that have been executed by the state on firm transmission. And I think I think what we were hoping for is that we would see wheels and imports have all of the same circumstances to qualify for priority, would be treated equally in all regards, recognizing there may need to be some narrow exceptions for import RA, given you don't currently require firm transmission for import RA, and some contracts have already been executed. But we don't see this proposal as broadly equitable, and then the CAISO needing a narrow exception to be carved out for import RA. We see this as broadly elevating imports to serve CAISO load over wheels and creating a very narrow carve-out, which we appreciate, for wheels that have been executed under these narrow circumstances.
I guess I view it differently. I view it as, and I appreciate your comment and I appreciate your position, but I do view that our resource adequacy contracted with their capacity to meet California native load. They did that in advance, and I think we're trying to recognize and put on the same playing field and recognize that there may be capacity that was contracted in the Northwest going through our system with the expectation that it would be able to get the same priority across our system. And we're trying to recognize that and create that equity. If the concern is the cutoff of the filing, okay, I can understand that and appreciate you putting that in the comments. But I think we're trying to recognize and provide a mechanism that those that were contracted in a similar manner to serve load have the same and fair and equitable treatment, and that was the objective.
Can I ask, Mark, that... Sorry, go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to make a follow-up request on that, but go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I understand what you described, Mark, and you know, we can put it in our comments. I guess I see even in the proposal the ability for non-RA day-ahead purchases serving CAISO load to fall into that pro rata bucket with PT wheels. Mm-hmm. I see in the proposal the ability for import RA contracts that are after the FERC filing date to fall into that bucket. I see import RA on non-firm transmission. I see import RA where the supplier might not have any supply, might not have a day-ahead E-tag, and then the PT wheel gets pro rata curtailed and they call up the supplier and buy the supply then. I just see a very broad bucket of enabling CAISO imports to serve load or imports to serve load in the CAISO BAA. That bucket seems incredibly broad, and then for the PT wheel, it seems incredibly narrow.
Thanks.
We do have one. Oh,
can I make one comment? This is Anna. I just wanted to ask. Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to ask Mark Holman if, when you submit your comments, I think, it's helpful to understand what you see as an equitable, but it would be also helpful to understand what you see as an improvement to, from your perspective, and that being articulated in the comments next week, because of course we're getting tight on time. So I just would appreciate that perspective.
All right, we'll take one more question and we'll move on.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Partha Malavaikar with PG&E. I have one comment and one question. So it's a good discussion in terms of open access principles and what's fair and equitable. We obviously are pushing for the proposal not being fair and equitable for different reasons in terms of in almost every other BAA and every other market, to get the highest priority service for transmission, you have to pay for and be planned for that transmission service on a long-term basis. And that really the open access principles imply that that's really a part of the package. And so I think what people are really wanting here is to pay for it on an hourly basis and yet still have that same priority as load that pays for that transmission service, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So that's maybe my first comment on the discussion so far. And so maybe my question is, has the CAISO considered, along with that service request on a monthly basis, having some sort of transmission reservation charge that goes along with on the CAISO system? I mean, ideally that might look like a yearly type transmission service, but at least having some sort of monthly charge to pay for the use of the transmission grid and wheeling through. It seems like that would be at least helping on the fair and equitable side. So just was interested in your thoughts on that type of monthly wheeling charge.
So Partha, this is Don. So that is something that we would look at from a longer term standpoint. For this summer, we were not planning to make any changes to the way our wheeling access charge would work, which is really charged on an hourly basis. But I do think when we look at a longer-term process in terms of determining, the amount of wheels that we would accept and then give the high priority on a forward basis, that I think you're correct that we would, in that process, want to look at, are there changes that we would make to how we would charge for wheeling access, especially for those high priority ones.
No, thanks, Don. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Go ahead and move on.
Okay, this is James again. So we moved down to slide 8 for those following along on the phone. So now in these next couple of slides, we'll go through the market penalty parameters. So on each of the upcoming slides, we've listed a pretty comprehensive list of penalty prices to give stakeholders really the full picture, but I'm just going to focus on the priorities related to wheels. When it comes down to implementation, the actual penalty prices may not exactly equal these quantities, so keep in mind that the relative priorities are really what matter, and these figures, or the dollar figures here are from our currently published BPM. Also that the penalty prices on the next few slides are relative to a $1,000 bid cap. So here in the ISM, the penalty prices for self-scheduled load, PT exports, and the export leg of a PT wheel will be the same high priority. LPT exports and the export leg of an LPT wheel will have lower priority. Again, the penalty price for the import leg of an LPT wheel will be set to $0, and the penalty price for self-scheduled imports and the import leg of a PT wheel will be equivalent at -400. So in summary, PT wheels will have equal priority to self-scheduled imports, but self-scheduled imports will clear IFM before LPT wheels. Again, we do not think that's necessarily an equitable result because not all our imports are self-scheduling. Next slide, please. So next in RUC, you can see that the penalty price for the export leg of a PT wheel is the same as the penalty price for meeting the CAISO's load forecast in the first bullet. You can see the import leg of the PT wheel also has equal priority to self-scheduled imports that cleared the IFM in the fourth bullet. So nothing has really changed in terms of priority from relative priority from IFM, but the key point here is that if any uneconomic adjustments are made in RUC, we will give all RA imports a RUC schedule up to their RA obligation, even if they didn't clear the RUC optimization. That's highlighted there at the bottom of the slide. This is important because we need those imports to be available in real time, because that's where we're going to solve this allocation problem in our post-HASP process, and we'll see how that works in some examples later. Next slide, please. Now in HASP, you can see that the penalty prices for the export leg of a PT wheel is $1,450, same as the penalty price for the power balance constraint above 300 megawatts of regulation. You can see in the last bullet that any self-scheduled imports from RUC needed to serve CAISO load in HASP would receive equal priority to the import leg of a PT wheel from RUC. So again, we put this big list of penalty prices here on the slide for completeness, but the key point here is that if we relied only on the market results in HASP, and since there's no requirement that RA imports have to self-schedule, that HASP would not necessarily give us the desired solution in terms of allocating capacity on our ties. So we need to look to our post-HASP process. All right, so slide 11 here. So we would use this proposed post-HASP administrative process if an import limit is binding and we are unable to meet the power balance constraint in HASP. If those conditions are met, we would go by this process where we would allocate import capability between imports used to serve CAISO load and the wheels. Low priority wheels can still make it through HASP, but if in this case it did, in this situation we would zero them all out. Next, we would perform a pro rata allocation of the import capability between PT wheels and imports. So the examples in the upcoming slides will walk us through how we do that. Then, since the imports were not actually scheduled in HASP, or may not have been actually been scheduled in HASP, we need to award those import schedules in merit order. Finally, all of the examples in the upcoming slides are going to just look at the import capability, but I want to be clear that we will have a similar process in place to address internal congestion on Path 26. That will include internal RA resources as well, which is a concern stakeholders brought up in their comments. Now, we will do the allocation in the software rather than require the operators to do this calculation manually. And the operators will be presented with two schedules. First, the HASP results, and second, the result of the allocation process. And they will make the final determination of which schedules will go out, and they will consider other operator actions they can take before shedding load while still maintaining the wheels if they can. Next slide. So I apologize, this slide is very busy, but it gives a detailed overview of the operating procedure when HASP is infeasible. For reference, this detailed summary of this overview can be found in the appendix of our final proposal after the import and wheel allocation examples. So like I said, system operators will not automatically start curtailing exports and wheels or shedding load when there's uneconomic adjustments in HASP. First, they will take actions to try to ensure that load and wheels and exports can be maintained. What they're going to do is first evaluate the current and forecasted load. They'll look at the available generation capacity and import capability. They'll look at our ability to meet our reserve obligations. Then using this information, if operators determine that the PT wheels and exports scheduled in HASP can be met without shedding load, then the schedule will be released. If the system operators can take actions that enable a PT wheel to be supported, the PT wheel bid quantity will be released as the final schedule. However, if system operators have exhausted all actions and are unable to support a PT wheel, then the post-HASP pro rata schedule will be released as the schedule. At that point, any necessary actions to maintain reliability will be performed by the system operators through emergency assistance. So I think, should I go through the examples or should I stop for questions here? Are there questions in the queue?
What's that, Victor?
We do have one question here.
Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and take the question. Fine.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, this is Michelle Kida from the CPC. I just have a question. You say that only when there's an infeasibility in the RUC process do you commit all the RA imports. So what happens if, let's just say, only PT wheels go through and there's no infeasibility in the RUC process, but the load forecast was off by 1,000 megawatts and you have like 1,000 megawatts forced outage and you no longer have those RA imports? What happens in the HASP process if those RA imports aren't there?
I think
so
then if there was a, oh, go ahead, Don.
Oh, go ahead, James. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and then you can add on that if then there's an infeasibility in HASP, then we would use the total RA megawatt bid as the basis of which to distribute the allocation between imports and wheels. And so
let's say there are 4,000 megawatts of RA bids in the IFM, and then you pull them to the RUC, but there's no infeasibility. So basically, there's zero. Just as an extreme example, so there's zero RA bids that make it through the RUC process, and so then you get to the HASP process, and RA imports aren't required to rebid, right, if they don't get taken RUC?
That's correct.
Okay, so then you have zero RA bids. So then how does your formula work in that instance? It seems to me that the PT wheels flow, right?
That's correct, because the RA imports, since there's none bidding, the CAISO's sort of shares will go through the example, or which we call the total import megawatt quantities would be zero. I would note that in RUC, we do make adjustments to the load forecast to cover uncertainty that might materialize between day ahead and real time. So we do try to cover that. So to the extent that we are feasible in RUC, we've covered even the uncertainty that we would like to cover through the adjustments we've made to the load forecast.
Okay, so like on 814, the load forecast was 1,000 off, and so you're saying you would commit those. Would you only commit 1,000 megawatts in my example of the RA imports, or would you commit all 4,000?
To the extent that we were infeasible in RUC, and we'd put in the uncertainty that we wanted to meet. If we were then not feasible in RUC, we would then give a award to all RA imports up to their RA obligation.
Okay, I guess I'm just saying that this only works then if you have an infeasibility in RUC, right? The allocation methodology.
Well, this is Brad Cooper. I think, Michelle, this is Brad Cooper. I think what you're describing isn't an issue specific to this proposal, but is a existing issue and what we're trying to address in the day-ahead market enhancements with the imbalance reserve product. It's an existing issue with the must-offer obligation for RA imports and the lack of a product in our market to cover uncertainty between day-ahead and real-time, like that.
Okay.
That as Don says, we covered today through biases or load forecast adjustments in RUC.
Okay, which seems necessary given that this is the new methodology, right? Because your basic this allocation.
Again, I don't think the issue you're describing is created by this proposal. I think the fact that you don't commit RA imports in the day ahead and then you might not have them in real time exists today.
Okay. And what if those RA imports did again rebid? So let's say a utility has an RA import and they don't get taken, but they rebid it in the real time because they'd really like it to flow. Would you count that as an RA import available for this pro rata allocation, or only RA imports that clear?
No, that would count. So there's a couple things to realize, Michelle. So to the extent that any import to serve CAISO load clears the RUC optimization, that is always included in the pro rata distribution. To the extent that RUC goes infeasible, we will then commit additional, or we will basically give RUC awards to additional RA imports that didn't clear the optimization.
Got
and then
it.
the total amount that we put there was the total RA that we committed. Then
yeah.
Next is to the extent that we weren't infeasible in RUC, an RA import did not clear the RUC optimization, and a load-serving entity bid that into the real-time market, that would count as an RA import in the calculations that we're going to go through in these examples.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Now let's go ahead and go through the example. Open it up for questions.
Okay. I did have one other question if you'd like to take it.
Let's hold off. We just have three examples to go through, and then we'll take them. Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, maybe the examples can provide some more context. So I'll try to go through these examples slowly so that we can all grasp the implications and then understand the various terms here on the slide. So first, we have the import limit of 300 megawatts, and that is the amount that we can schedule in on a specific intertie. And we're going to assume in these examples that there's only one intertie to be considered. Then we have the total RA imports that have been shown on the monthly plan. So in this case, we have 150 megawatts shown on an RA plan. We have a PT wheel looking to schedule 200 megawatts. Now, when we get to HASP, the HASP solution, there'll be a binding constraint on the import limit because between the imports and the wheel, we'll have 350 megawatts looking to flow with a 300 megawatt limit. And assuming the RA imports in these examples are bidding instead of self-scheduling, the HASP solution will schedule only 100 megawatts of the imports and keep the 200 megawatt of wheel. But we know we had to make uneconomic adjustments in this case, so we moved to the allocation process. Now, the first step is we determine, in the allocation process, is we determine the amount of megawatts the CAISO is deeming to be the portion needed to serve our load by taking the total RA import quantity of 150 megawatts. And I just want to highlight that the way that we're calculating this total import megawatt quantity is actually going to grow with each example. So this, with each example, we're going to add on a complexity to the solution rather than show the final and complicated solution for the calculation of this total import megawatt quantity right away. So just be aware of that. We then take the 300 megawatts of import capability and pro rata distribute it between RA imports and the PT wheel. So the import allocation will be the 300 megawatt import limit times a ratio of the total RA imports, in this case, over the total megawatts looking to get scheduled between imports and the wheels, which is sums to 350. And so the result of the calculation is that the import allocation would be 128.6 megawatts, and the PT wheels get allocated the rest of the 300 megawatts, which is 171.4 megawatts. And you can compare that allocation to the HASP solution in the fourth bullet to see, what the magnitude of the effect would be from this allocation. Next slide. So this is example number 2. In this example, we have reduced the import limit down to 250 megawatts. Originally, it was 300 on the first example. We now have 100 megawatts of total imports scheduled in RUC, which includes RA and non-RA imports. and the total RA import bid is now 90 megawatts. So the PT wheel is still 200 megawatts, and in the HASP solution, again, assuming the imports are being bid instead of self-scheduled, the HASP solution will cut the imports to 50 megawatts and keep the wheel at 200. So there's an uneconomic adjustment being made. We move to the post-allocation process. Now we are using the maximum of the RA imports or the RUC import schedule as the basis of our allocation. So that would be 100 megawatts. We then pro rata allocate the 250 megawatt import limit between the import and PT wheel using the calculation at the bottom of the slide. And again, you can compare how the final import calculation and PT wheel allocation compares to the HASP solution to see the effect of the pro rata allocation. Last slide, please, or last example. In this third example, we've got the same 250 megawatt limit with total import scheduled in RUC as 100 megawatts, but total RA import bids as 300 megawatts. So not all of our RA import bids in this example have been scheduled in RUC. By the way, this is why we want to have all RA imports receiving a RUC award for this exact reason. The PT wheel is looking to schedule 200 megawatts, and assuming that imports are bidding, the HASP solution will schedule 50 megawatts of imports and keep the 200 megawatt wheel. Now, the total import megawatt will be the lesser of the import limit and the max of the RA import bid and schedule. So now we've added another term to that total import megawatt quantity to consider the import limit as well. And we use the lesser of because, so 250 megawatts would be the result of this calculation, and we use the lesser of because it wouldn't be fair to use the total RA import bid as the basis of the allocation in this case, since it exceeds the import limit anyways. We'll then use the 250 megawatts as the basis to distribute the pro rata the allocation of import capability between the import and the PT wheel. And again, you can see how, going through the calculation, how that would change the allocation between import and the PT wheel. So I'll stop there if there's any questions.
Sure. I know we have one in the queue. Again, if you have a question, press pound 2 to raise your hand. Victor will take the first question.
All right, your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Just two kind of general questions. First, are PT wheels or even LPPT wheels subject to BCR or exceptional dispatch cost allocation as measured demand when you're in addition to their wheeling access charge? I'm just forgetting how some of that applies.
So Dan, this is Don. Yes, or Brad, you can go ahead.
Go ahead, Brad. Yeah, the export leg of wheels is included in measured demand in the various settlement allocations.
Okay, and then the other question I had is just kind of about the HASP manual process. Will that happen quickly enough that it can interact efficiently with the resource efficiency evaluation and make sure that kind of accurate accounting of available supply is getting picked up there?
So again, we would have the HASP results that come out. The results that come out of this process would then feed into the next resource efficiency evaluation run at T-55.
Okay, so any adjustments that are made would then feed into the T-55, and the idea is that all that would be completed before the T-55.
That's correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
We do have one more question here.
Okay.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, it's Michelle. Just a few questions. So I just want to confirm that the import limit is also limited for the PT wheels, just as it is for the RA?
Yeah, this is Don. That's correct, Michelle. So assume the PT wheel was bidding 300 megawatts as well in this instance, then it too would be brought down to 250.
Okay. And in this example, it sort of illustrates my issue that you'd have to have a REC feasibility to get all the RA imports, right? So this allocation mechanism works only to count all the RA imports only if you have a REC feasibility, which was, I think, James just said, right? So,
Michelle, can you ask that again? Because I think what this example really shows is that there was probably a derate in the tie between day ahead and real time.
But if there's a derate in the tie, then you won't have all the RA imports necessarily, right?
So if it occurred after RUC.
Yeah, exactly. So if it occurs after RUC and you've given up all of your, there's no infeasibility, so you haven't committed all the RA imports, you're in trouble, right? In terms of the allocation?
Well, again, that to the extent that the RUC optimization did not give imports awards to serve ISO load, and it wasn't infeasible and we didn't commit more, then both of those, you're basically then would be limited to what cleared RUC.
Okay, and then I just want to confirm, I think these examples also illustrate my other point, is that PT wheels will always beat RA imports, even if they're self-scheduled, right?
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, what you mean by that?
Sure, yeah. So if there's so let's go to the north. If there is a constraint, like you have a certain limit, like on your example, it's 300 or 250, and you have, bids above that, the PT wheels always go first because you pair the import with the export. So PT wheels are what, negative 750 plus the export at like negative whatever. And then the RA import is negative 750, but as long as you're serving load, right, the PT import, the PT wheel will always beat load, right? So HASP will always come out with a PT, right?
I think what you're describing there is HASP would be feasible. And if that's the case, we're able to meet both the internal load and the wheel schedules.
Okay, and if HASP is infeasible, they're exactly the same, and we don't know what wins. Is that right?
And I think when HASP is infeasible, this is the key point, I think, of the entire proposal, is that penalty prices alone can't get you to an equitable distribution of that limited transmission capability. And for exactly the math that you've been doing in numerous examples, is that those penalty prices, the way that they interact, could basically not result in an equitable sharing of the import capability in these examples between RA imports and high priority wheels. And so as a result, since you can't do it through penalty parameters, you can't do it, the market results won't give you that equitable solution, which is why we need to do the post-task process.
Okay, and I guess I'm concerned because, I guess, let's see, LSEs in California, they have their RA imports to meet 1 and 2 load. We expect them to flow, but wheels will always take priority. LPT and PT wheels will always take priority, which means that it's more likely than less likely that in the real-time process, we're not going to have those RA imports, right? And if something goes wrong there, then the RA imports are gone, right? So what happens if I guess you're saying that you bias RUC, so that helps, right? So I guess that's the way it helps. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Do we have anybody else in the queue, Victor?
At this time, I don't see any other questions.
Okay. I just want to, can we go back to that last slide? I just want to make sure it's clear because I did say for that third bullet there that the 300 megawatts, and I highlighted, that's one of the benefits of having all REC. If there are imports not scheduled in RUC, why we would like to have all of them get a RUC schedule so we can have this 300 megawatts. But it's also true that if they bid in HASP, that would add to this quantity. So I didn't mean to say that that was the only place we would get those total RA import bids from RUC. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is our third and final change to the export load and wheeling priorities section, and it's relatively brief. So it covers how we changed the proposal to allow non-RA variable energy resources to be designated as a resource to support a PT export. These resources can meet the attestation to provide 4 15-minute intervals at the same output level if the export is set at the lowest of the 4 15-minute forecasts of the VER at the time of bid submission. And of course, we are assuming here that there's close coordination with the export scheduling coordinator and the VER scheduling coordinator to do this to the extent that they're different. So for example, if we assume the forecast for a VER resource in interval 1 is 50 megawatts, interval 2 is 45, interval 3 is 55, and interval 4 is 60 megawatts, this resource could support 45 megawatts of PT exports. So finally, the CAISO is reviewing longer-term solutions to the wheel and import allocation of import capability through our maximum import capability enhancements initiative that recently commenced. And we also want to highlight that proposed changes related to wheel-through self-schedules will be temporary tariff changes that will be replaced by the process that's ultimately developed under this initiative. The last point of clarification I want to make that's not on the slides is it was brought to our attention. We misrepresented one of the sentences in the final proposal related to the master file flag for the attestation. I think it's written in the proposal incorrectly to make it sound like the default flag for a resource that attests to be able to support a PT export is set to yes, and then they have to attest that they are not able to do that, and thus setting the flag to no. It's exactly the opposite, where the default flag for that master file flag will be set to no, and the resource does in fact have to attest yes and select the flag if they are able to meet the requirements. And so we apologize for any confusion that may have caused.
James, I think that's your last one.
That's the last slide, so we can open it up again for some final questions.
Sure.
We did receive about 3 questions here.
Okay. Thanks, Victor.
Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, it's Michelle at the PUC. I think this will be my last question. So with regard to variable energy resources supporting firm exports, I think I understand what you're saying, and that is that they are limited to the lowest 15-minute quantity. But let's say, for example, that the 15-minute, this is the 15-minute bid amount, but what if the 15-minute actual is 0? So if you have an EIM entity, for example, that has a 500 megawatt non-RA wind resource, and it forecasts its hourly schedule, the lowest 15-minute quantity to be 200 megawatts, but then it produces 0, I'm concerned that this proposal doesn't necessarily enhance reliability for the summer. Can you explain how that, and then I have one more question.
Michelle, I don't think that there's an ability to address that concern prior to summer. I think that's something we would look at on the longer-term basis. Again, when we're looking at forecasting our resources in the HASP time frame, we're looking at 4 15-minute intervals. And again, to the extent that someone is using a VER as a PT export, we'll have that documented and identified. And to the extent something like what you described occurred, we can describe that in the event that we have to do some postmortem analysis on the summer.
Right, but it occurred last year, for example. I've already looked at it, so that's why I'm raising it as an issue. So then I just want to raise another issue. So for purposes of resource sufficiency, I just said that EIM entity says in the day ahead that it's going to have 200 megawatts, but it turns out to be 0. We'll deliver the 200 megawatts, right? And they can count that towards our resource efficiency. Is that right?
No, because remember, to be a PT export, we reevaluate that the designated resource is able to still support the PT quantity nominated in HASP.
Right,
so
but you're only evaluating bids, right? So they bid in 200, but it turns out to come out actual at 0. And so we're going to give them that 200 megawatts, right, even if the wind resource is at 0? So they get to count that in their resource efficiency?
Well, again, most of the vast majority of resources in the variable energy resources in the CAISO system, remember we have to be able to generate a forecast for them. They actually use our forecast, and we use that to set the upper economic limit of the bid curve of the variable energy resource. So under your example, if they're using the CAISO's VER forecast, it's going to be at 0. And so the designated resource wouldn't be able to support any export quantity above that.
But why would the forecast be 0 at T-minus 75? I mean, I'm thinking of what happened during the edge cases, and where one of the reasons we had the outage was because the wind died down suddenly. So in that circumstances, I don't guess that you were forecasting that, right? So I'm trying to get at, if you didn't forecast that it was going to go out at T-minus 75, would the EIM entity get to use the entire 200 that they bid in for resource efficiency purposes?
To the extent that the 200 was sorted by the forecast at T-minus 75 or in the half time frame, yes, it would.
Okay, and then
this is Brad, and so would the ISO for the remainder of its VERS. That issue exists for all of renewable resources used in the resource efficiency evaluation.
Right, but I'm saying that we get to use our forecast as well.
Yes, in the resource efficiency evaluation, yes.
Okay. Yes. And then what about, would CAISO have to carry that 200 megawatt deficit? So if the wind resource were dedicated to the external balancing authority, and even though it doesn't produce, but we backfill it, right? Would we have to carry that 200 megawatt deficit for purposes of resource efficiency?
Again, resource efficiency is based on the forecast that we have at the basically the T55. They lock the forecasted value. So whatever the forecasted value of that resource is at T-minus 55, that output would count towards the CAISO passing its test, just like any other BAA in the EIM.
Okay, so you're saying the deficit wouldn't show up because the deficit occurs in real time in my example.
It wouldn't show up in the resource efficiency evaluations, but it would show up to the extent that its output fell off as we got within the hour.
Okay, and when we get in the hour, is that where you're doing? That's not where you're doing the resource efficiency test, right? So you wouldn't block us off and make us pay $2,000 in the EIM for that, right?
No, you're correct. The last test is performed 40 minutes prior to the hour.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle. Looks like we have 4 others in the queue. Is that correct, Victor?
That is right. And I just unmuted your line. Please go ahead.
Hi, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions again. Another technical question. So if your operators exceptionally dispatch, import RA, or make out-of-market purchases at the interties, would that go into the bucket of RA imports when doing that pro rata allocation? Both of those two types of imports?
Those are usually done after the HASP process has been done. So if it's done post-HASP process, then of course it wouldn't be in there. But we probably wouldn't even be able to get additional imports if we're import constrained, for example. To the extent that we've made actions prior to the HASP, those basically feed into the HASP optimization, and then to the extent that we've been remained infeasible out of that, then the pro rata kicks in. Does that help?
Okay. Yep, that ties it all together. Thanks.
All right, next question here. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Ali Yazdi at Morgan Stanley here. Can you go over how the congestion component of the intertie is going to be determined in a situation where the allocation is done but not based on penalty parameters?
Well, again, we're talking about the HASP process where we, basically clear hourly blocks and have an advisory pricing for the hour in that time frame. So when we come into the 15-minute market, then that's where we'll do the pricing. And so to the extent that you need to curtail self-schedules in the FMM, the price would be negative 150.
Okay, but then if as a import RA in the RUC you're bidding in at zero, or you're offered to bid in at zero and you have to flow that as part of the allocation, would you have to pay the minus 150 then?
So remember, if you're an hourly block resource, and this is today, this isn't anything new being introduced as a result of this proposal or the summer, to the extent that you're an hourly block, whatever comes out of HASP is your schedule, and then you basically are a price taker in the 15-minute market. So to the extent that you are an RA import and an hourly block, then there's no change to how we would treat anything from the way we do it today, in that you're settled. Your schedule is determined in the HASP time frame, and your price that you're settled at is determined in the 15-minute market.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is there's no real change to congestion as a result of these allocations. How are you going to?
That's correct. If you think about it, we have a total amount of import capability that we need to distribute in HASP. The HASP result couldn't come up with an equitable split of that, and so we do this post-HASP process, but we still allocate the same quantity of the import capability.
Okay, thank you.
We do have one other question here. Just a quick reminder, pressing pound 2 if you wish to ask a question. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, guys. Dave Francis at DTE Energy Trading. A couple quick questions. Just want to make sure on slide 16, so the variable energy resources, the intent is that the upper limit of the export support is the lowest of the 4 intervals, correct? So you could do up to 45 in your example, but not more than 45.
So the key is 45 could be a high priority export. The remainder would have to be low priority export.
But we agree that it's up to 45, not only 45.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then Dan's question from CES expanding on, so if there is an out-of-market call made prior to HASP, so my concern is that that volume then becomes large relative to the market volumes and crowds out the market volumes on a pro rata basis. Is that how the math would work? So if the intertie limit's 500 and there's 300 bid already and the ISO attempts to procure a variable up to 500, does the ISO's 500 out of market become part of the calculation on the pro rata?
So Dave, I think the way to think about it is, to the extent that we've done an out-of-market action and can incorporate that information into the HASP optimization, we will, okay? And that would, and then after that, to the extent that HASP is then infeasible, and the imports binding in these examples here, the same, we would just look at the RA imports or what cleared RUC in determining the CAISO's share of the pro rata allocation of the imports.
Okay, I think you answered that correctly. I think you appreciate my concern. I'm not saying that you would knowingly do it, but I would, absent seeing the actual procedure, assume that the out of market would be no greater than the intertie limit. Again.
Yeah, that's, yep.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right, at this time, I don't see any other questions in the queue.
All right, now on to the tariff. So Jordan and Anthony, I will go ahead and share the language. I think Jordan's going to start us.
Yep. Thanks, Christina. This is Jordan Pinu, Senior Counsel at the ISO, and I will be presenting the first portion of the tariff changes that we have here related to the scheduling priorities that we have for the day-ahead and real-time markets in the tariff. So we're starting out with Section 31.4, which you see in front of you now, and this is the scheduling priorities in the day-ahead market. What we have here in subsections A through I are the adjustment sequence for the IFM from highest priority to lowest priority. And sections A through C that you can see on the screen right now, and also section D on the next page, will not be changing. So at the top of that list, the last three adjusted are self-schedules for RMRs, TORs, ETCs, and internal transition constraints. The changes that we're proposing begin in subsection E, which specifies that the export leg for a priority wheeling through self-schedule will have the same priority as the ISO demands and also exports sourced by non-RA capacity. And I do want to clarify that at the end of this tariff language, there is a new definition for that term, priority wheeling through self-schedules as well. So we'll go through that at the end. In subsection F, the next priority level down, we have there that an addition that specifies that the export leg of a non-priority wheeling through self-schedule has the same priority as self-schedules that are not sourced by non-RA capacity. And then finally, in subsections H and I, we have the priority for the import legs for both the priority and non-priority wheeling through self-schedules. And this, again, just specifies priorities that are consistent with the proposal. And in the case of I, was already the case in our markets. So that covers the day ahead section. We can move on to 34.12, which is the real-time scheduling priorities. And subsection 1 specifically deals with increasing supply in the real-time markets. And subsection A there has a change that specifies that the ISO forecast of ISO demand and the export leg of a priority wheeling through self-schedule and exports backed by generation from non-RA or non-RUC capacity are on the same level, at the highest level in the real-time market. Subsection B is an entirely new section which provides that the next priority level includes the day-ahead RUC schedules that are self-schedules of exports, not backed by non-RA capacity. So this is the exports that came out of RUC but are not supported by non-RA. And then we also have the day-ahead RUC schedules that are the export leg of a non-priority wheel-through on that same level in Section B. Section C, the next priority level, deals with real-time self-schedules of exports that are not backed by non-RA generation or non-RUC capacity, and real-time self-schedules that are the export leg of a non-priority wheel-through self-schedule. So those two categories are on the same level in the real-time market. And then the rest of the section here is unchanged. And then the last item that I'm going to go through is just a quick change to section 34.12.2, which is in the real-time market again, it relates to decreasing supply. And here we just have an addition at the end, the lowest priority we've added that the import leg of a non-priority wheeling self-schedule will be the lowest priority in the event we need to decrease supply. And that covers my sections. We can pause there and maybe take questions.
Yeah, please. So, Victor, do we have anybody in the queue? Again, press #2 to raise your hand.
I do see one question here. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Caller, your line may be muted. We can't hear you.
Can you make sure your phone is on unmute? I just unmuted you. You should have heard your line has been unmuted. I'm not getting any audio. Let me try to mute and unmute you. Here we go. I'm not getting any audio from them at this time.
That's okay. Yeah.
I can go to the next question. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Audio's not coming through.
Hi, can you make sure your phone is not on mute?
Victor, do we have anybody else in the queue?
Just these two questions.
Okay, and the audio's not coming through for either of them?
Not at this time. They both asked questions before. Just give me 1 second here.
They can also send it through the chat. And oh, sounds like somebody's line is open. Caller, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not going to get any audio from them at this time.
Yeah, so maybe you can send a chat to the event producer. I don't have my chat box open. We can also move on, and then we can go back if we need to. Jordan will be on the line. Victor, are you there?
Yeah, at this time I don't see any other questions. If you can please press #2 again if you have a question. And if you just ask a question, if you can please hang up and dial back in, and we can try to get you back on the line.
You know, we'll keep going, and then we can go back. So, Anthony, I think you're up next.
Okay. Before I get into the edits on Section 30.5.1, I do want to encourage everybody. I know on April 2, when you submit comments on the final proposal, I'd also encourage everybody to be providing input and edits on the draft tariff language. I know in the past we've certainly found comments and edits to be extremely helpful in putting together tariff language that's clear and workable. So again, I encourage everybody to put in comments on the tariff language next Friday. Regarding the edits to 30.5.1, these really pertain to the rules regarding exports, and they reflect some of the revisions that we proposed that were contained both in the draft final proposal and in the final proposal that was posted last week. The first edit is a new subsection B, which basically indicates that the ISO is going to notify a scheduling coordinator that its resource is supporting a high priority export. The scheduling coordinator will then confirm that only an out-of-balancing area LSC has a right to that capacity that's being exported. The scheduling coordinator also has to confirm that its supporting resource is reasonably expected to be available and provide the same megawatt quantity for each of the 4 15-minute intervals in the trading hour based on all the information that was known or should have been known to it at the time of the designation. We're also adding the last sentence there picks up, I think, on the last slide that James went through, that a resource, basically this is intended for variable energy resources, that they can satisfy this requirement if the forecasted quantity for each of the 4 intervals is equal to or greater than the designated quantity. Lastly, the provision, we're going to add an edit that basically says high priority exports cannot be supported by capacity from an energy-only delivery resource. And again, that was a component of our draft final proposal. We also are proposing a new subsection W, and these are primarily rules that were spelled out in the draft final proposal. Basically, a scheduling coordinator for a resource that's supporting the self-schedules of imports and scheduling points served by generation from non-RA shall submit a RUC availability bid for a quantity equal or greater to the quantity of the export. The scheduling coordinator also must submit a $0 bid up to the export self-scheduled quantity. Finally, the scheduling coordinator has to offer the capacity into the real-time market to support the real-time self-schedule of the export. The last change is a new subsection X that basically says a scheduling coordinator shall not schedule an import to support an export transaction. Such a transaction is properly scheduled as a wheeling through. Also, as Jordan mentioned, there will be a new definition for a priority wheeling through self-schedule, which is referenced in the 2 priority sections. And as we discussed in the slides today, basically a self-scheduled wheel through is one that's supported by 1, a firm power supply contract that was entered into prior to April 23rd, and 2, monthly firm transmission to deliver the wheel through energy to the ISO border. Again, to the extent the ISO's final proposal changes from what it is now, the definition of priority wheeling would change along with it. And that concludes all of the edits we have regarding the bidding rules and the definition. So, Christina, we can take any questions.
Sure. So, Victor, did we have those 2 people enter the queue again?
I think we do have one of them here. Your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Still not getting any audio.
It's a number ending in 795. Your line has been unmuted. You might not have heard it. Can you please go ahead? All right, I can try the next caller here. Oh, that might have been them. I'm sorry. Can you try one more time here?
Victor, do we have anybody else in the queue?
We do have another caller here in the queue.
Try that one.
And I've just unmuted your line, and please go ahead. Caller ending 764. Please go ahead.
Having some technical difficulties here. We're not able to get any audio from the people that are in the queue. Maybe submit your questions to the chat to the event producer. If they're straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, another option, Christina, is if folks are having trouble getting through, if they could email us any questions that we can try and get back to them.
Absolutely.
At least so in time before they submit their comments.
Yeah, we apologize. We're not, we're having some technical difficulties here. You can submit your questions to the ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com mailbox. let me go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll share that email address in the chat. I apologize. I'm not able to take these questions. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go through the next step. So we are looking forward to receiving your written comments on the final proposal and draft tariff language. Those are going to be due next Friday, April 2nd. There is a template out on the initiative webpage. We ask that you use that when submitting your comments for both documents. And so typically with the tariff language, if you download the red line tariff in Word and add your changes, track your changes, you can attach that in the comments template. So that's kind of the best way to comment on the tariff language. We are planning to post revised draft tariff language on April 8th, and then we'll ask for you to submit comments prior to the call. Those will be due on the 15th. We do have an MSC meeting for this topic, April 16th. We will have the tariff call on the 19th for the revised draft tariff language. And then we are planning to take the load, export, and wheeling priorities proposal to the EIM governing body on April 14th, and then the ISO Board of Governors on April 21st. So we are anticipating on filing the language for this topic, April 22nd. The dates for implementation, one is for the topics that were just approved by the board, and then the July 1st date is for this, the load, export, and wheeling priority. So any other questions? We can maybe try again. Oh,
hey, Christina, I think the target date for filing is April the 23rd.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I will update the slide and repost. But Callie Wells did send a question in the chat. She said, in the definition for the priority wheeling, is it supposed to read source to ISO border rather than sink? I don't know if you can respond to that. Anthony?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, that looks like the only chat question. So anybody else in the queue, maybe we could try again, Victor. Otherwise, you can send your questions to the ISO stakeholder for yourself mailbox. I'll send that through the chat right now.
At this time, I don't see any questions in the queue.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate the input that you provided today. We do look forward to your comments on April 2nd, and enjoy your weekend. Thanks for your help, Victor.
Not a problem. That concludes our event. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.